Well, welcome everybody. My name is Richard Brent. I'm the head of content here at Briefing, and welcome to this Briefing webcast, which is a complement to all our regular publications, insights, in-depth articles, and research reports that explore a wide range of business management challenges and approaches affecting leaders at the top UK law firms. I'm sure you are familiar with us, but if this is your first time listening to what we have to say, after the event, I encourage you to download the Briefing app from your app store of choice, and you'll be able to access all of our most recent releases and our full archive from recent years, covering the whole sector, which is rich in case studies of transformation and innovation projects and results seen across the law firm business functions. Also benchmarking of your different business choices and challenges to gauge how your firm compares to peer firms in the market. And lots of interviews with senior leaders like those who I'm going to be chatting to here today, all about their evolving strategies and often distilling that experience down to some very practical and actionable takeaways that your own firm might be able to explore. This next hour's conversation is being recorded, and it will later be distributed to the Briefing audience, as well as being hosted on our site, briefing.co.uk. We have got plenty of time towards the end for you to ask any questions of our speakers, perhaps share some of your own perspectives on the topics that we're talking about, and you can do that in the usual way in the Q&A here, and I will bring those questions, surface those questions to the speakers in due course. If you'd like to speak, you can also raise your hand, come off mute, and you can ask your question live if you'd like. So one of our latest pieces of law firm strategy research at Briefing was working with HSBC UK, a partnership that we've had with HSBC UK for the last 6 years, to do some benchmarking around strategy and investment decision making. And we found 4/5 of law firm leaders expect that their firms will increase technology spend in 2024. And that's to an average of 6% of their annual revenue on IT systems and resources overall throughout the year. And that's an uptick from 5% when we did the survey the previous year. And that supports a recent finding also from Briefing Frontiers, our own annual benchmarking research published in February every year, that appetite for exploring greater innovation in delivery, often driven by client demand, will also only continue to grow as the market becomes more competitive and new technology-driven options keep arriving on the scene. However, we understand that firms are even now often taking a fairly fragmented approach to their investments in these solutions, without perhaps enough joined up thinking still, and sometimes even leading to solutions being more or less siloed to separate business management functions or teams. That's not helpful to the core of our conversation today, which is managing to transform firms' potential wealth of data from a seemingly insurmountable challenge, I hear so often, tied down by systems or poor practice, into a really strategic choice and asset, whether that's for process improvement, for better decision-making, collaboration, performance, motivation, client satisfaction, and ultimately firm competitive advantage. Here's a few more findings from Briefing Frontiers this year. A third of firms, UK firms overall, have a business-wide data strategy, according to those leaders that we surveyed. Almost half, though, suggest it's still a work in progress over the next 12 months, but that there will be one in place by 2026. And of those without one, half again think it's absolutely an immediate priority. They need a strategy now, they say. A fifth think they can give themselves up to 2 years, and 1 in 10 thinks that that isn't a priority at all. Some of the challenges, of course, include technology change strategy, the setup for sharing between different systems, behaviors that involve data entry, categorization, extraction, interpretation, and of course, positioning the work as a business priority that all can and will appreciate with their respective roles and business goals. So if you're in that cohort who are prioritizing this highly, but are still on the journey, what's at stake? What's the size of the potential prize we're talking about? Where to start? And what to expect that you might encounter or need to overcome along the way? And that's what we're talking about today. We'll hear perspectives from a law firm leader who was recently charged with launching a new approach to data as several forces converge to drive his firm to operate differently in that space, and another who is overseeing the firm's enterprise risk management work. And today's webcast is in partnership with the Attest Group, which is a management consultancy specializing in data and the secure unlocking of value and data assets. And we'll hear from Paul Suffield at Attest Group a little later. And I'm first of all going to speak to Mark Penlington. And Mark is head of risk resilience and internal audit at the law firm Irwin Mitchell. And he was responsible for establishing the internal function there when he joined almost 3 years ago with a risk-based audit approach that aligns with corporate strategy and ensures compliance with all regulatory requirements. He has a background beyond legal, though, in insurance and the travel sector as well. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to meet you.
Thank you for joining us. So you're at Irwin Mitchell in charge of enterprise risk management, the framework for that overall. And I'd like to first ask you a little bit about what that looks like, practically speaking, and how does technology and underlying data strategy fit as a piece within it?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Richard, and really good question. So enterprise risk framework, what that looks to do is actually start to map and understand your risks across the whole organization. I think traditionally in legal, there's been a lot of focus, quite rightly, a risk in legal regulatory space, but actually risk is a lot wider than that. Your technology, your people, your operational, and all those sort of key sort of risk categories. Yeah. So the enterprise risk framework allows you to identify where your key inherent risks, i.e. the risk of doing business, and then actually start to build a framework around there so you can start to gain consistency and compare and contrast like with those risks across the business, and therefore allows you to understand then, well, where should we actually really focus some of our effort in this area? Yes, again, legal regulatory, very key. It's a risk that we really want to manage, but also how does technology support that? How does people support that? And all these risks are very interlinked. So allowing to do that sort of Irwin Mitchell has allowed us to get a really good view of where we should sort of focus our risk mitigation activities and giving us real insight around that. And how sort of technology supports that as well. It allows you to go down to sort of a deeper level quite quickly, and actually identify those relationships and understand the really aggregation of risk as well. We're all good at seeing risk siloed, and so, but actually trying to bring that together, that's probably a bit of the hard yards. That comes with enterprise risk framework, but then actually gives you really good rewards around identify around those risks and that real insight. And so that really helps them with bringing in data, specifically on that as well, because data can be seen as quite siloed, in its own little area, but actually bring it in going, well, how does technology support that data strategy? How does people support the data strategy? How does what we do, our clients and our operations, support the data strategy, and what does data need to give to that? It gives it a nice sort of framework to actually bring that all together.
I see. Thank you. And what are the most critical elements or principles then for making sort of a success of that? Are you looking to change or improve anything within that framework within Irwin Mitchell? Is there a sort of priority focus?
The one of the key things with the sort of ERM is actually getting the appropriate buy-in, and getting that at all levels. I've been very fortunate. I've got real support from my executive committee and my audit and risk committee around enterprise risk management, and that's really helped then to sort of cascade that out throughout the organisation of why this is important and why we're getting appropriate why we need this insight around there as well. But also what's important around there is actually kind of keep it simple as possible. Actually, in the end, and I have seen, and in companies I've worked in the past as well, that you're trying to make so many connections and so many relationships that sometimes you can't see the wood through the trees. And particularly with data, you can very quickly get this whole mass of data and go, well, actually, what am I trying to understand and what I'm trying to get out of this as well? So trying to actually go down and go, what actually do we really need to know around risk? Don't try and build everything straight away. because
Right.
you'll need to take the organization on a journey with you. So start focusing on risk, then you can go into controls, and then you can go into that insight piece as well. And then eventually you get to the bit around actually what are our risk mitigation activities and how can we actually reduce the risks that we want to reduce and tolerate the risks that we need to tolerate.
Yeah. You alluded that to the idea that the data itself could be, the volume of data could be one risk in a sense, the sort of the risk of information overload at least. And you mentioned simplification, try to simplify as much as possible. When it comes to data, what's the sort of the take on that? How do you try to simplify how you are feeding different parts of the business the data that it needs?
Yeah, so I think one of the good examples around when you can get all this sort of massive data is you start to build KPIs and KRIs, key risk indicators as well, and you can end up building a whole mass of those, and actually you don't know which one to sort of follow. So by keeping it simple, what you need to do is actually be a bit sort of ruthless and going, well, actually, these are my key risk indicators. And what I use for that is, well, what's our strategy? What were we most trying to sort of find out? And actually try and boil that sort of data down to actually, these are the 2 or 3 things that help me most to manage our enterprise risk framework. And then actually, what do the board and the exec most want to know about in terms of what we're trying to do to achieve our strategy? So yeah, it's trying to sort of take that mass of data, but I think the first things is what we're looking to actually understand first.
Yeah. Okay. And when it comes to decisions about technology, what the firm will invest in, how it goes about implementation, business change, transformation generally, how do you approach projects like that from a risk perspective?
Well, what the risk perspective really helps going back to looks at introduce the consistency and trying to compare those projects equally and on a similar footing, and therefore then you can actually really go, well, where do we really need to focus our investment? Actually, what project is more important than the other? Everyone says their project's important, so of course they are, but actually we need to do some priority sort of listing around there. Quite often I've seen sort of in my career that actually projects end up drawing on the same resources. There's 5 people in the firm that are all doing these projects around there. So being able to use that sort of risk insight helps you to prioritize that when they need to divert their attention, and also about be able to, the risk allows you to get sort of the data around that as well and utilize that data when a project is on track. What is deliverables look like? Are we hitting the milestones? If not, why not? And how do you really build up that sort of risk landscape? But again, providing that insight to your exec and to your board as well, so they can make the appropriate sort of decision making around where they need to divert resources.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. One of the top obstacles to getting buy-in for more change we found in this year's Briefing Frontiers research was sort of handling the volume of it and sort of the prioritization piece that you just alluded to. That was more challenging than several other sort of potential barriers like cost, like buy-in more generally, like measuring return on investment. It was just that sheer volume of potential that you need to sift through and prioritize. So another finding that I wanted to pull out this time, it is from the research in partnership with HSBC that I mentioned, when we asked leaders to sort of rank their overall organizational challenges, for the first time this year, cybersecurity topped the other leading challenge, talent management, attracting and retaining talent in an ultra competitive environment. It seems that cybersecurity is now number one to keep on the risk radar, I suppose. How does that fit in with your own function and work? What are the highest priorities when it comes to managing that and the data privacy, I suppose, protocols that might come alongside?
Of course, a great question and very topical at the moment as well, and something we've been very much sort of discussing with our executives as well, and actually wider as well with some of my peers around that. Actually, one of the highest priorities around cybersecurity is actually people people are
Right.
consistently comes across as the weak link in the cybersecurity framework. So even though we've built effective protocols and protections around how to protect getting into our system, and therefore even if you do get into our system, how you can prevent you moving around the various different applications from people to finance and to our client services or whatever around there. Actually, we're spending a lot of time on actually focusing on still on that people element as well, because they are often the gateway to actually cybersecurity sort of failures around that. We all know clicking on a dodgy link, the phishing attempts that try around there as well, and even on a very unlikely event that actually it is an internal bad actor as well. So we do focus purposely quite a lot on the people aspect, and by actually we can use data to identify actually where within our organization people were more likely to do it, so we can use that data in testing and try and see what actually sort of websites they're sort of clicking on, what type of emails do they get, and therefore then we're actually to provide a bit more bespoke training or protections around that. And so that is a big sort of focus for us at the moment.
Thank you. And a final question. I mentioned at the start that this is the first law firm you've worked for. I think you previously your previous career was in other businesses in other sectors. What can you tell us about how the areas that we've discussed already are managed differently in those other sectors, perhaps with more maturity, perhaps with different tools and resources available? Are there any striking differences whereby legal might want to compare itself to how things are managed in other sectors, or to, dare I say, up its game?
Yeah, very good question, and I think about maturity, and I think legal is a bit more developing than, say, if I compare to sort of financial services where I've worked previously. I think some of that is a resourcing issue, and naturally, but also I think there is more legacy technology that I've seen and sort of discussed with my peers around in technology. So that means there's a lot more work to do to actually get us up to the right level of cybersecurity, which we've done really well at Irwin Mitchell, but I know that is a focus for other people as well. And I think a big, if I come from past as well, a lot of businesses were already on the cloud and were actually quite advanced than that. And I think if I go back to them now, actually the cloud is no longer a discussion because they were on it. I think in the legal world, there's still a big push to get to the cloud. It's still very relevant at the moment as well. So we are probably a few years behind maybe some of the other industries around that as we look to get out of our on-prem and move to more cloud as well. So I think it's more of a maturity issue, which is driven a little bit by resources, maybe a little bit by skills, but I see sort of more cybersecurity and technology skills coming into the legal sector now. So hopefully that should accelerate over the next few years.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. And we'll bring you back to talk to our other guests on this webcast a bit later. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you.
And I am now going to speak to Harshana Amarasuriya, I think. Harsh, hello.
Hello.
Hi, Harsh, hello. And as I mentioned at the start, Harsh is head of financial planning and analysis at Clyde Co, but is very interested in the data world. And therefore, I think it's fair to say, Harsh, you've been selected, or you've nominated yourself as somebody to oversee the launch of or the formation of a new group that's sort of got data very much in its within its remit. I don't know if it's an official group yet, or something less formal. But tell us a little bit about what that looks like.
Yeah, and thank you, Richard. And do apologize, I couldn't. My mic wasn't working quite well before,
That's okay, not a problem at all.
I think when you talk about selecting, it's quite a newish role for the industry, and particularly someone to own data across business. the first question is, what does that mean? What does that role entail? What is your remit? Because you are going across multiple functions, and it's sort of I have been at Clyde 8 years, so it's one of those roles that you sort of grow into, I think, because you begin to start interacting with other teams and stuff like that. We are making it more official. I think as an industry, we are beginning to understand the value of data. There's quite a lot being written and also spoken about data being an asset, particularly for law firms now with AI and other technologies coming through. Data and how do you use data, and to Mark's point about how do you make sure that it's a secure framework and you're not getting access to things you shouldn't be, and all of those sort of things. It's quite an interesting journey. It's a journey that I think can't be imposed. That's what I'm finding. You got to sort of earn your stripes, if that makes sense. Work with all of the different teams, understand the use cases, understand the business requirements, and then collaboratively come up with a solution. And that's where I think it's taken us a little longer than I would have liked to have. But now we've firmly sort of set up a governance group. We are beginning to bring in data stewards from all of the functions. We are looking at it. So I'm effectively becoming the data custodian, but effectively I'm trying to also understand how do we use the technology stack in the best way possible for deployment. And what I mean by that is, how do you visualize data? How do you get data in the hands of decision makers in the best way possible, using the tools that they're most comfortable with, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Yeah, absolutely. Is there something about in sort of Clyde Co's point on its journey at the moment that has sort of crystallized all of this then, that means that there's a need for something now?
I think particularly, yes, I think the short answer is that we are moving to the cloud. So a lot more of our systems are moving to the cloud.
Right.
We are investing quite a lot in upgrading our systems, and that's across HR, finance, case management, all of the areas of the business. And I think the key bit to the successful implementation of a lot of these system projects is having good, or at least better quality data. And I think that's what's really, for Clyde, focus the importance of, when you look at all of the projects that the business wants to undertake and are undertaking currently, the one common theme is if the data is not, in the right shape and form, all of these projects will be less effective than it can be. So that's why I think there is a, probably a catalyst is, to make sure that the investments pay off and there's a good return on investment. You've got to also spend some time on people, as Mark said. I totally agree on that, because data without the right people knowing what to do with it is, again, less used. But data is what makes most of these systems and new technologies really work smoothly.
I see. Yeah. And in the early months of putting these new structures, these new roles in place, have you found already that people's attitudes to data, the way they think about data across the firm is changing? And how are you finding or guiding people to behave or think differently? You've mentioned data, not champion, data stewards, haven't you there? Yeah.
I think it is slow at the start. So I think for the audience, you got to be patient. It is quite slow at the start. You've got to win a lot of hearts and minds along the process. I find that so for example, visualizing the art of the possible, and we are using quite a lot of Power BI in some aspects, some parts of the business. We are using other sort of tools as well in other parts of the business. Visualizing what can be possible if we sort of get data, even as a prototype or a proof of concept or something like that, really goes a long way. rather than just talking in theoretical terms. And that's what
Mm.
we spent a lot of time. So I had a lot of my team, spend a lot of time with key business stakeholders building out some of their use cases. uh, you know, 2 or 3 at the start. Then we use those 2 or 3 production use cases to try and convince the other teams, this is the value of having good data coming through. This is the decisions that you can use these, dashboards, models to sort of support. And I think once they see how it links up, that sort of gets them over that initial hesitation of, where does my data land? How am I responsible for the end to end? I think that's one of the big hurdles that I faced, and I still am, but I think it's getting less, is sort of saying, I am the data steward for my system, whether it's an HR system, a finance system, or whatever else it is. Once it leaves my system, and it's being used in another downstream system, am I still responsible for that data and the data quality and the transformations that data goes through and everything else? Now, I do take their point because they're not in full control of what happens to the data, but that's where I think the risk framework and the governance framework really need to work hand in hand about understanding, you know, where can those transformations lead to, either errors or, areas of risk, to put
Yeah.
it in another way, and how do you monitor those, and how do you sort of get back to that data steward saying, are you aware that the data you're responsible for is being used in a way that perhaps you didn't think it should be, or it's not fit for purpose? So I think a data dictionary, which is what we are working on currently,
Oh,
is
okay.
quite useful for to make sure those links, and even things like terms, right? So one of the things most of us on this call will be quite familiar with is the uh, s- different pieces of data being called the same thing,
Mm.
whether it's a start date or an end date or something like that. Depending on which system you're talking about, it might mean slightly different thing, right? So then when you go across businesses, there's a lot of confusion as to, are we, comparing apples with apples, or is that, even though it's called the same thing, is it slightly different, right? So that's where a data dictionary and lineage and things like that play quite a valuable role.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you. Another word that Mark mentioned was prioritization, and you've talked about data as an asset, but not necessarily just one asset. A
Yes.
portfolio of assets, meaning that you might need to make some difficult decisions about exactly what you decide to try to do with it.
Yes, certainly. And I think it's like any other business decision. It sort of comes back to, how much can you afford to invest, and what resources have you got, and, what's the outcome you're looking for. So certainly we do go through that prioritization sort of, at a very senior level, understanding what is our strategy. So again, to Mark's point, you got to link it back to company strategy, and trying to understand, in the next 12, 18 months, what are some of the key strategic objectives the company is trying to, achieve or embark on, and then what data elements is pivotal to making that happen. I mean, for us currently, it's really understanding people and utilization and things like that, which is, not new. I mean,
Mm.
particularly for a professional services firm. But I think linking that up with, the types of clients we work, the industries we work in, are beginning to become far more useful. And also, post-COVID, we've seen a huge importance on office space utilization,
Uh-huh.
and how do we monitor that? How do we best use the footprint we have? What are the different ways of working? Is that helping productivity? Is it deterring from, more productivity, that more a more productive approach? And I think the data insights are becoming quite useful in evaluating some of those business cases.
Interesting, thank you. What are some of the other implications for your technology choices? You referred to sort of cloud being one of the factors in this sort of coalescing at the moment. We obviously hear a lot about I think I mentioned right at the start, sort of a fragmented approach to technology potentially. Obviously, with AI coming into the picture, there's increased potential for proliferation of technology in different parts of the business that might be underused. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the bigger technology picture and how you need to make decisions about that link to your data strategy?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you my personal opinion, and I apologize, it might not be the IT sort of opinion, but
Okay.
I think there is becoming a need to rationalize technology, because there is quite a few technology vendors out there. There's quite a lot of good technologies coming up that, in my view, can all do similar things. If you're looking for a particular use case, you'll probably have 4 technology vendors who'll all be able to equally do, what you're asking it to do. For a firm, I think having too many disparate systems which all don't talk to each other doesn't support a cohesive data journey, right? And that's where I think, for example, most firms will either be, AWS or Amazon or Microsoft or one of the big providers. You'll be looking at technologies that fit that stack, whichever core technology you are on. And I think the trick, or what we are preparing for, is the ability to be more flexible in the future. So I think one of the things that I've learned over my career is that historically you'll get embedded in a technology, and then once you're in and you have a lot of experience in it, you build a skill set around it, you build teams around it, you're very resistant to move off it, because it's a big change, right? And it's going back to the drawing board. Given the technical changes that are happening now, I think the landscape's moving so quickly, there is beginning to become a resistance to be embedded in any one technology, to become a little bit more nimble as a firm. When you see you see a good piece of AI technology coming up, your core systems or your core system shouldn't be an obstacle to being able to use that piece of software or technology, right? So it has to be flexible enough. And that's where I think there's quite a lot around the data architecture of firms, where, of course, you wouldn't want to change your ERP system all the time, or you wouldn't want to be changing, your payment systems and finance systems and things like that all the time. But you need to have a data architecture which supports also being able to move with the times and pick the best of breed in certain areas, right? And I think AI is one of those big ones where everyone talks about it, but we fully don't understand it. And you sort of get lots of new use cases that AI can be helpful in, but you can't sort of easily bolt it on to 10 different core systems. So you got to be able to sort of have the data in a way that you can use it, but without also having to redesign your core systems and everything else.
I see. Yeah, thank you. A reminder to those watching, if you have questions for either Harsh or Mark, I'll be bringing Mark back for a more general discussion in a moment. Do put them in the Q&A, or let them be known in another way, and I will get to them. There's plenty of people listening in, so I'm sure you will have questions. One more, Harsh, before we bring the others back. If there's a firm in the minority that I mentioned at the start who aren't looking at this as a priority, and you're obviously a firm that's taken a decision to do something differently, what are the sorts of risks of poor data strategy, but a poorly managed data that is not managed in a more coordinated and joined up way? And so what's the extent of those risks as well?
I mean,
The impact, I suppose. What's the potential impact of the risk is what I'm getting at.
Exactly. I think what you generally see is a sort of a very, you know, disjointed back-end experience for your internal customers. So whether you talk about lawyers or, you know, other professional services, you know, if you don't look at your data journey within the firm, your end customers, in my opinion, tend to suffer the result of that, right? So you'll have either errors in certain systems that causes rework, you'll have duplication, you'll have a lot of admin. You know, you end up with teams growing out where there shouldn't be a team, where they should be, you know, a straight through process. When the data doesn't talk to each other, the traditional way is, okay, we'll create a team that just moves data around, right, or keeps things working. I think as we get into a far more efficient and nimble sort of environment, one, we can't afford that sort of situation, but I think in the reality of it is it also causes a very poor experience for internal business users and of course external clients as well. But you start with an internal sort of business case where, you know, for example, if you're onboarding a new joiner, what sort of an experience is that? And you know, have they got their IT in time? Have they got their user access in time? Have they got, you know, all of the folders they need access to in time? All of those things. You will find that in most firms where that experience is not as smooth as it should be, it probably relates more to their systems and data and how it flows through systems rather than anything else, right? So it's how do we improve that experience, what initially for ourselves, but then eventually to our clients and customers as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Mark and also Paul Suffield to join us. Paul joining us for the first time, Managing Director at Attest Group, who I mentioned is our partner for this webcast today. Paul, starting with you, what links do you see yourself between a firm's approach to data strategy and the way that both Mark and Harsh have described it here, and overall direction when it comes to how law firms, you know, need to think about what they invest in and the horizons for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So good afternoon, everyone. I think from our side, it's often seen as most projects are as siloed, which is always part of the challenge. I think what's great about what both Mark and Harsh are doing is that the firm has got to focus on that. Particularly, Mark's around his enterprise risk framework is what I like about that is it's about bringing together the different decisions that impact risk. So that holistic view over what data strategy means, I think, is often the piece that's missing. And where we see a lot of opportunity is how do you link that data strategy into your investment strategy, because it's not just to do with IT, it's to do with people as well. So that could be an M&A acquisition. It could be, how do we onboard that particular acquisition and what's that going to mean to be able to get the insight from that firm blended with the insight from our firm on why we acquired said firm in the first instance. So it's really about trying to help see, and the other 2 points I thought that came out from both Harsh and Mark, which are very, very important, is one was the sort of the keep it simple. And
Yes.
that really is so important. And if we look at the direction of travel of technology, particularly what's coming out with quantum and the speed of development that will happen in there, linking back into the security and the cyber piece that was mentioned, it's very important that to unlock the capabilities of these technologies, that simplification in architecture is absolutely key. But that's not an easy feat for any business, regardless of size and scale, and then becomes more complex with larger size and scale. So then it's really about where do you start as much as anything, and that's where we try to help.
That was one of the questions that I put slightly easily tripped off the tongue at the very start. You know, where do you start? Can you answer that question?
Well, yeah, and I think it's quite telling from the research that you did as well. So if you look at the main problem that you mentioned around the volume of projects, it's really about how do you help to look at that, as Mark mentioned, from where do we prioritize and what do we do, but making sure that you take the opportunity to drive value ahead of the start of those projects. So what it means for that is each project that you have is going to be running over one or many processes. So it's about that ability to map out that process, to understand as you're about to move into an investment, and technology is normally a good drive for it, what are those data sources and what's the impact of as I put them into the new system. And by just going through that process of understanding why do we do what we do now, as well as how, can A, drive value in terms of an improved experience, but importantly, it will start to identify where, as Harsh put, you might have data quality challenges around whether it's structure, naming conventions, and then giving the opportunity for the firm or the partners they're working with to go and address those challenges process by process, because that again drives the value back out to the other key point, which is around having that level of sponsorship. Because if the executives aren't sponsoring what you're looking to do on data, it's going to be very, very hard to bring all the relevant departments together. And until you've brought everything together, you're never going to see the true value of the asset.
Thank you. We do have a question. Thank you very much from Naveen Agarwal. Question to Harsh, but obviously everyone else can weigh in as well. What do you think, Harsh, of the importance of data obfuscation and synthetic data from a testing perspective? That sounds quite technical to me.
Essentially, it's I think what it means is anonymized data that you would use, and sort of made up data to test certain things. We do quite a lot of that. Obviously, there is risk. As Mark says, where you can't use live data, particularly as you're testing certain things. I think it's a necessary evil. I personally, I'm always concerned that your test data set and your production data set, particularly if they're two very different things, can actually have different results, and we see that all the time. So, but it is something that you actually have to be able to do, particularly in a law firm or a professional services firm. You cannot test with live data. You cannot test with real data. I think volumes is a very good sort of a very important bit. So even if you do use synthetic or obfuscated data, one of the pitfalls we've had is you wouldn't test the volumes that will go through production. And I think that testing for speed, efficiency, even with test data, you should be mimicking production volumes wherever possible. Right. But yeah, and also the other sort of caveat that I've seen is you should be testing as many variants as you would think is realistic in actual. Right. So what I mean is, the different scenarios and the different types of data and stuff like that, where, there's always something strange in real data. Whereas when you synthesize the data set, or you're using a test data set, you're sort of creating the scenarios you want to test, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And sometimes you limit yourself to the known or the most common issues, or the most common variations, and you're not fully tested for that one uncommon thing that might happen every so often, which might put a spanner in the works, sort of thing, right? So, but again, I've seen us spending lots of time in the test environments testing something. You'll progress it through to production, and then production data comes and something breaks, right? So
Right.
It's always one of those things. Yeah.
Thank you. I have definitely learned something there. Thank you very much. Another question we have. I see you're driving data strategy from different parts of the business. We've talked about governance and finance. This person asks, it's an anonymous question, do you think that this can be driven from IT? Can the IT function drive data?
It's a good question. I smile because personally, I don't think the IT will ever own data. Right. And this has been an eternal question in most of my businesses, where IT are definitely the enablers of using data and the systems and making sure that we are secure and things like that. But in my view, and I think at Clyde, we are beginning to sort of, and hence my role as well, where I think data needs to be owned by the business, who understand the data, who govern the data, who know what to look for. I think it's much too big and important to ask IT to do that for everyone. And I don't think they have the expertise to do that for everyone. So
Yeah. Okay.
I would fully agree with that. 100%. I wouldn't want IT to come up with the why are we doing it. They come up with the how. And that's really where their skills are. You say they're real enablers to do that. It's for the business, and I really sort of the commercial arm. Why are we doing this? What do we need to get out of it? And then it allows people to concentrate on the things that they're good at. I think I can see a tendency of sometimes, oh, it's technology, therefore it must be IT. But IT are really a part of that, doing it part with the business and really focus on that sort of methodology. And then the business then are able to refine, actually, oh, we want a bit more around this and about this. And they can concentrate on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Another question. This is sort of going in a slightly different direction, but I think it is a good one to ask. Given the recent M&A activity in the legal tech supplier market and new providers coming in all the time, how's that impacting law firms' decision making when it comes to choosing new technology solutions? Do you notice firms being more cautious, doing more due diligence, or making decisions based on any other criteria, I suppose? Or are they gravitating more towards long-standing, tried and tested solutions? Paul, that might be one for you. You have quite a sort of
that's a very
overall
appropriate
view.
question for me, funnily enough. So I've spent the last sort of over the decade trying to help introduce enterprise-grade technology into legal services, because for me, the real power of it is around how do you keep up to date with what is a very fast-moving, very fast-developing market, which fundamentally, to sort of Mark's framework, has a real risk back into the law firm. So I think that the legal market is slowly moving forward. But there is still a very large reliance on existing technology that has grown up in legal. And that referenceability, whilst I absolutely understand it as well, I think is probably a challenge for a lot of new technologies to come in. But I think it sort of linking us back into the session that we're having today, really, if we look at the direction of travel of technology, you're always going to need your fundamental system of record, and you're always going to need your fundamental system of people. But actually, to really unlock the power of things like artificial intelligence, and for me, what that really means from a business perspective is the natural language models and sort of generative AI, because realistically, no one's a big fan of technology. So the more simplified that you can make that end user experience, and to really take advantage of that, that's the interface then, that whatever my role is within the firm, I interact through that, I ask the questions. So back to what Harsh was talking about around the complexity that exists in IT architecture of now, that simplification really means that you're going to have a central data repository, or at least aim to be having that then is feeding out into the information that is required for me to do my role as effectively as possible, and then the ease of getting access to that information. So I think legal's got a way to go, but I also think that there is a big shift of looking to cloud, which is the first step. But it's then, I think, really about how are we taking the right decisions where we can see this as a technology partner who, over time, we're going to be able to simplify processes or might be able to do more within the same to try and help us to really drive towards that goal that really delivers one thing, right? Which is, how on earth am I going to drive a level of agility into my commercial and operating models? And that's by trying to drive data decisions into that. And ultimately, what we see in lots of other markets is the real reason why that's needed is because of all the external events that you can't control. And I think COVID, we can always go back to it still, was a fundamental shift for every business. And it really demonstrated the importance of that ability to have agility to respond, right? And the ones that do it the fastest are the ones that actually drive the most value from situations out of their control.
Thank you. Harsh, do you have a take on the changing legal technology landscape, legal technology supplier landscape?
Yeah,
And
I mean, I think I agree with Paul. And I think the addition that I would like to make is that the way lawyers are delivering the law is also changing. So the technology is one sort of pushing lawyers to sort of change the way they work, and I think lawyers themselves are beginning to understand that they need to use technology to deliver a better service and a different service. So it's sort of a, both sides are changing or evolving at the same time. So technology is trying to keep up with what lawyers want technology to
Yeah.
do, and then lawyers also change in their offering. So it's quite an interesting space if you look at, and I think it's not just lawyers, it's probably, all professional services, accountants, everybody is in the same sort of arena where, even things like ChatGPT, right, or Copilot, lots of people are now just using it for, sentence correction or writing better sentences or something like that. It's not a huge business case, but everyone's beginning to use it, and it's changing the way they write documents and how they synthesize things and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot more to come in that area.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. On your I was interested in your data dictionary, Harsh, and it struck me that was more about getting definitions for things more than data literacy. Is data literacy on the agenda as well, or is that another chapter?
No, it is. I think that's it's an evolving thing, and it's an evolving piece. So our dictionary is also evolving. So we are trying to sort of bring both, if that makes sense. So you define your data elements, but then you're also trying to sort of say, where would you use this type of data, or what would you try to do with it. But I think data literacy definitely. So there is a, quite a, I think, a popular term where it says a data-driven culture, within the
Yeah.
organization. It's not new. I mean, that's been there for many years now. But I think different organizations interpret a data-driven culture in different ways, right? So, and in just my experience in different industries, some are quite data savvy, depending on what your own background is. You're not afraid of numbers, you understand numbers, you like to use numbers when you're making a decision, and you're naturally data-driven. Whereas other industries think data only for finance people, or they don't want to have anything to do with numbers and things like that. So then I think your challenges are a little bit higher, and that literacy piece is much more important if you're in an organization where people are not naturally comfortable with numbers.
Have you found that more harsh as well? From the smaller the margin of the industry, the more data focused that they absolutely seem to be. Because at the end of the day, the reason for doing all of this is around cash flow and working capital, right? How do we make sure we've got the cash flow and the working capital to be able to respond to the demands of the lawyers and the clients? There's one that says there's always a strive for protection in data in a law firm. However, decisions can be made without 100% perfect data, which is a utopia. How would you encourage a firm to focus on data and not challenging the quality of it, plus that they're responsible for that data quality? And I think in those, very quickly to comment to that, and then Mark, will get your view very quickly before we end, is the data process is definitely a journey, and identifying what feeds what output first is really important, and then looking at the quality. 100% data quality is a utopia, absolutely. And I think to that point with cybersecurity, particularly given the advancement in technology, making sure that that data can be moved around securely is very important, which comes back to your simplification point, Mark, of the risk is in transit as well. So the less your data is in transit, the less risk that you have.
Yeah, certainly. And the bit around here, yes, you're always looking for perfect data, but actually you need to build some allowance in there that actually perfect data doesn't exist. Even in the sort of, actually you've got wonderful data quality, actually it's still going to be incomplete because you're going to have a gap somewhere around that. We live in an incomplete world. I think the bit around, I understand not challenging the quality of data because you feel, actually, well, you're just not moving forward. But I do think it's important for people to have confidence in that data, because without that, actually, you'll just keep recycling the same sort of decisions, and actually you'll never really sort of move forward. So I think there is a key thing around there is actually how do you get people confident in that data, accepting actually it's not going to be 100%, building up that risk appetite in my world. Well, we're happy with 90% because there's always going to be an element of risk with any decision we make, and then that allows them with
Apologies,
that
Mark, I do just seem to come up
Yeah.
to half past.
Oh yes, we have. Yeah.
I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to thank absolutely everyone for joining us. I'm sure some people have got some hard stops. Thank you, Harsh. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Richard. I think his internet's dropped off, unfortunately. But thank you all for attending. I hope that was insightful. And any questions, please do come back to us. Thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.